Beneath the golden splendor of palaces and the thunder of 1,000 war horses, the Persian Empire carved its legacy not just in stone, but in screams. It was a civilization of poets and tyrants, of wisdom and wrath, where loyalty was praised with riches and betrayal answered with horrors unspeakable. In the shadowed corners of this ancient realm, justice wore a mask soaked in blood, and punishment was not merely a sentence, it was a performance. What you are about to uncover is not the stuff of myth or legend, but the terrifying reality of a civilization that ruled with the unspeakable cruelty. For those accused of serious offenses, repeated theft, severe dishonesty, or even treason, the penalty was not merely a swift end. Instead, the criminals were subjected to a protracted and agonizing death, drawn out over days. This punishment was reserved for the worst of offenders, those who had broken the fundamental trust of the empire, or in some cases, those who had dared to threaten the divine order of the Persian king. The process began with the condemned being stripped of their possessions, their status, and often their dignity. The victim was laid down upon the ground, their hands and feet bound securely to prevent escape. Then a massive stone block, typically carved from the local granite or stone, was brought forth, an object of unrelenting weight and cold indifference. This stone could weigh several hundred pounds, its rough surface a silent symbol of the cruelty that was about to be inflicted. As the stone was placed upon the chest of the victim, the weight of the punishment was not immediately lethal. Instead, the victim would be crushed slowly, the pressure increasing with each added layer of stone. With each passing hour, the weight upon their chest grew unbearable, and the victim's breath became shallow, labored, their ribs beginning to crack under the immense pressure. The suffering was not quick, nor was it merciful. The stone did not care for mercy. It cared only for justice, or what the king's justice demanded. This method was designed not just for death, but for the complete and utter degradation of the individual. The crushing weight symbolized the overwhelming power of the Persian state, its sovereignty, and its ability to destroy the body as easily as it could dominate the soul. The execution was often carried out in public, a grim spectacle for those in the surrounding areas. Onlookers could witness the slow and drawn-out suffering, a visual reminder of the consequences of defying the Persian order. As the stone was removed, the body would often be mangled, barely recognizable. The victim's ribs crushed to dust, their lungs punctured, and their body crushed under the weight would lie lifeless as a grim reminder of the consequences of betrayal. For many, the punishment would be over within a matter of hours, but for others, it could stretch out over days, a torment that defied natural human endurance. In the Persian Empire, truth was not only revered, but considered sacred, especially when it came to matters of the king and the state. Lying or treason was viewed as an unforgivable offense, one that threatened the very stability of the empire. This punishment was reserved for those whose crimes were particularly egregious, such as false testimony, slander against the king, or betrayal of the royal family. The method was straightforward but excruciating. The condemned individual would have their tongues severed from their mouth, effectively silencing them forever. This act of mutilation was both a physical punishment and a public symbol. It was meant to destroy the individual's ability to communicate and spread lies, thus cutting off any future attempts to deceive or betray. The removal of the tongue was not a quick execution. It was performed in front of witnesses, ensuring that the victim's agony was witnessed by others. The gruesome nature of the punishment sent a clear message. The Persian king would not tolerate deceit, and those who betrayed their fellow subjects would lose their most vital means of communication. In cases where the tongue was not removed, the condemned might still be subjected to mutilation, where parts of their body were disfigured as further punishment for their deceit. But it was the tongue removal that stood as the ultimate warning, a fate worse than death, stripping the victim not just of their life, but of their very ability to speak. In the Persian Empire, branding with hot irons was a harsh form of punishment used to mark criminals for life, leaving a permanent scar that would forever remind society of their crime. The branding process was as brutal as it was effective. A hot iron, heated to a red-hot temperature, was pressed against the skin of the condemned, often on their face, chest, or forearms. The searing metal would burn through flesh and tissue, leaving behind a permanent, often grotesque mark. These brands were not random, but were designed to signify the specific crime the individual had committed. For instance, a symbol of a chain or a sword might be branded onto a thief's skin, while a deserter could receive the image of a broken shield. The pain inflicted by the hot iron was excruciating, and the brand itself was not just a physical scar, but a visible declaration of the individual's criminality. The punishment was intended to be a lifelong reminder of the person's transgression, marking them as an outcast in Persian society. Unlike a prison sentence, branding condemned the individual to live with the consequences of their crime forever, as the brand would be visible to all, often leading to social exclusion and shame. Branding was also employed as a way to identify and control slaves. Those who attempted to escape or show disobedience to their masters were branded as a form of both punishment and a means of preventing future escape attempts. The marked slaves could not disappear into society undetected, as their branded marks would make them identifiable to authorities or anyone who encountered them. One of the most physically agonizing punishments in the Persian Empire was scourging, also known as flogging or the whipping post. This form of corporal punishment was reserved for those guilty of offenses that did not warrant death, but were still considered severe breaches of the law. Crimes such as insubordination, disrespect to authority, minor theft, or public disturbances were often met with this brutal and public method of punishment. The process of scourging involved the victim being tied to a post, often in a public square or a designated execution ground where a crowd of witnesses could gather. The condemned person would be stripped of their clothing, leaving their back exposed to the harsh punishment that was about to unfold. A whip, typically made of multiple strands of leather or rawhide, was used by the executioner to lash the person repeatedly. The whip was designed to inflict both pain and physical damage, as each strike left deep welts and cuts on the victim's skin. The pain was excruciating, as the whip often tore through the skin and flesh, leaving the victim's back raw and bloodied. The severity of the punishment could vary depending on the crime and the status of the individual. For more minor offenses, a few lashes might be administered, while more serious crimes could result in dozens or even hundreds of lashes. The Persian legal system did not impose strict limits on the number of lashes, and the punishment could continue until the executioner was satisfied or until the victim was left on the brink of death from blood loss or shock. The scourging was intended to be a highly visible and public spectacle, ensuring that the punishment served as a lesson to others. By humiliating the condemned in front of a crowd, the Persian authorities reinforced their power and control over the population. The sight of a person being whipped was meant to remind the public of the consequences of defying the law, instilling fear, and deterring others from committing similar offenses. In some cases, the punishment was accompanied by additional penalties, such as forced labor, banishment, or payment of fines, compounding the victim's suffering and humiliation. For slaves or criminals of lower status, scourging was often a precursor to even harsher forms of punishment, such as branding or execution. The public nature of scourging ensured that the punishment was not just a means of retribution, but also an act of social control. It reinforced the authority of the Persian rulers and reminded the people of the costs of transgressing the laws of the empire. The punishment was swift, painful, and humiliating, qualities that made it one of the most feared methods of enforcement in the Persian justice system.